Good morning. What a wintry, glorious morning sitting here in Boston. It's still October, but it's snowing. And it's not just snowing, but there's a lot of snow outside. So yesterday was a special day. America, for the first time, if you remember, there was a court case that went to the Supreme Court about this family that wanted to be able to write on their passport, their American passport, that they were born in Israel, but they were not allowed to because they were born in Jerusalem. And another ridiculous thing that's been going on for so long in America was that since America didn't want to touch the status quo, so to speak, about Jerusalem until there would be finalized peace talks, there was a rule that you're not allowed to write anyone that's born in Jerusalem, it has to say Jerusalem on their passport. It can't say Israel. And finally, yesterday, Secretary Pompeo announced that the American government will allow people to write Israel on their passport if they were born in Jerusalem. And in fact, the first person that was able to, and Ambassador Friedman in Israel gave it to him, was the guy who's been battling for 18 years and lost his battle in the Supreme Court because the Supreme Court said it's not us, it's Congress that writes these laws, but now the government allows it. And it was very special because my dad, on his passport, it says Jerusalem, because my father was born in Jerusalem in 1940, as many of you know, and it was never able to say Israel. So although my father's Israeli, it had to say Jerusalem. And to be able to see this day, and my father just turned 80, so it took 80 years, but now he's able to have on his passport, on his American passport, that it says Israel. He was born in Israel. So it's a very special day. And it's ironic because it happens in the week when we read about Abraham, the first promise God gives Abraham 3,800 years ago, when God tells Abraham that I will give the land to your children. And he promises them the land of Israel, including Jerusalem, including all of it. And 3,800 years ago, 3,800 years later, we finally get the world to recognize, in America, which is the superpower in the world, that we could write Israel when we're born in Jerusalem. So it's a special day. And I always tell people, when you recognize and you celebrate Israel, it's not 70 years or 75 years of Israel. It's thousands of years of Israel because God gave it to us as a gift. So mazel tov for that. But I want to speak about Abraham, actually. Within that dream, when God makes the covenant with Abraham and he promises him the land, Abraham says, it's all good, God. And God tells him, your reward is very great and I will be your shield. But Abraham says, what does it help if you're going to be my shield if I'm childless? I don't have a child. It's all nice to have all these great things, but if I don't have a child who's going to inherit me, what does it help me? All these gifts that you're giving me. And there's something else interesting if you step back. When you speak about Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, you always call them the fathers. Elokei Avraham, Elokei Yitzchak, Elokei Yaakov, Avinu. Avram, our father. Elokei Avotechem. You're the God of your fathers. We always call them fathers. And when we speak about the mothers, when we speak about Sarah, when we speak about Rebecca, when we speak about Leah and Rachel, we always say the mothers. And the truth is, it's ironic. Why would we call our patriarchs and matriarchs by the name fathers and mothers? You know, many countries have, different ways they title the people who founded their countries. But ironically, in America, it's called the Founding Fathers. And the reason is because the Founding Fathers actually were very influenced by Judaism. And because in Judaism, we call them the fathers and the mothers, that's how they became the Founding Fathers. But the question is why? There's so many more moving ways to introduce them. I mean, what makes someone our father? Because he gave us our physical DNA. Or a mother, someone who carried us for all our life, for 9 months, But think about it. If you want to think about something great, Abraham was a revolutionary. We could have called him Abraham who brought monotheism. Abraham who fought wars to protect people. Abraham was the first person who brought godliness to the world. There's so many ways we could call Abraham. Why do we call him the father? And why do we call the mothers the mothers? What's the message here? And it was many years ago when the Rebbe was speaking to the donors. This goes back almost 70 years ago, when the Rebbe was speaking to donors of the yeshiva, and he was speaking about education. And he says, you know something interesting? Before Abraham, there were many great people. Adam and Eve were molded by God. Does it get any greater than them? God put them in the Garden of Eden. Yet we don't find any continuity to them. We don't find anywhere where their children are continuing in their way. Noach, the Torah says Noach was Ish Tzaddik. He was a righteous man. God saved him. And his children. Yet what do we see about his children? The Torah doesn't speak about it. Granted, the commentaries speak a little bit about Shem, his son, but we don't hear about it. There was Mishuselach, who lived the longest. What do we hear about his children? How about even Chanoch, who went with God? We hear about him, but we don't hear anything about the children. The first person we hear about his children is Abraham, his son Isaac. And the Rebbe said what Abraham revolutionized more than anything was that till then, you were able to suffice as a human being with your accomplishment. You could put your name on a building, on an idea. You developed this idea. You built this building. You donated to build something. That was great legacy you left for yourself. But when Abraham recognized and pleaded for with God, when God told him about all the things he says, I want a son. Abraham realized that the only way to continue, the only way for continuity, the only way for this world to continue, and the greatest reward is when you have a child who follows in your footsteps, when you have a child who continues what you do. So Abraham was the first one who says, God, it's all nice what you're giving me. You're my shield, and you promised me so many gifts. But what about my child? What about a child who's going to continue these values, who's going to be just like I am, and going to follow in those footsteps? You know, we've had many of our leaders throughout the generations who made those mistakes. They inspired millions of people. Yet to their own family, to their own children, they were disconnected from. And what Abraham was teaching us is that to be a good Jew, you don't have to be an influencer on Instagram. You don't have to have tens of thousands of followers on Facebook. You don't have to be able to speak to millions of people. You need to be able to speak to your child. You need to be able to nurture and guide your child that they should continue in the ways. And how do you do that? The only way you do that is by the way you live. What does Abraham do the first thing? When God tells him to have a circumcision, he says, I want my children to have it. When he's feeding the guest next portion, it says, he sends Ishmael. He says, I want you to do it. Children see what we're excited about. They see what we're passionate about. They see what's valuable and important to us. And that's what they want to be. So Abraham recognized it's not about changing the world. It's about changing your family first. It's about having a child. It's about having continuity. And that's why Avraham, Yitzchak, Sarah, Rivka, our patriarchs, our matriarchs are called Avinu, our fathers, our mothers. The greatest gift they gave us was that they had a child that continued in their way. And their child had another child. The door of a door from generation to generation. We continued with the revolution of Abraham and Isaac. You know, a previous Lubavitcher Rebbe was sick in his last 10 years. And he went to Chicago to fundraise for the yeshiva. He was an only son. And when he went there, he found out that his mother passed away. Now, the Rebbe was very, very close to his mother. And it was very sad for him because he went back to New York, but he couldn't make it back in time for the funeral. And someone came to comfort him while he was still in Chicago. And he says, you know, next week's Torah portion we read when Sarah passes away, it says Abraham cried for her, and it says the chaf and the small chaf. And the rabbis say, why does it say the chaf and the small chaf? And the rabbis answer, because Abraham cried, but he didn't cry so much. And the rabbi looked at the previous episode and says, you know why he didn't cry so much? Because Sarah wasn't really leaving us. Because she left a child who followed in her way. And yes, it was sad, but the fact that she had a child who continued in her way meant that she was still with us. And that's why Abraham cried, but not as much. And she was playing on a play of words because the previous rabbi's name was Yitzchak and his mother's name was Sarah, both their second names. But the message is so important. I think about it today. when we celebrate this, I think about my father and his father and the one who came before him, the love that they instilled for Jerusalem, and the recognition that the greatest country in the world recognizes that Jerusalem is part of Israel and allows us to put it on our passport. Listen, have a great day. Remember how important our children is, how we nurture them, and that the greatest compliment that we give our parents is that they're founding fathers, Abraham and Isaac, Avram Avinu, Sarah Imenu. There are mothers and fathers who had children who followed in their way. Let us do the same for our children. Shabbat Shalom, stay warm and enjoy.